When I was pregnant for 8 months, my husband Ethan Wilson abandoned me on a country road after receiving a phone call from his beloved girl Sandy Moore. An SUV hit me. At the last moment of my life, I called Ethan, but he hung up impatiently. Sandy has a high fever now. Can you stop being unreasonable and bothering me? As he wished, I would never bother him again. The next day, Ethan took on a hit-and-run case and became the criminal's defense attorney. It was Ethan's mother's birthday, and Ethan and I drove for 2 hours to the countryside. But on the way, he received a call from Sandy. "Ethan, I feel so bad. I have a high fever." Hearing Sandy's weak and helpless voice, Ethan immediately panicked. "Sandy, don't be afraid. I'll be there right now. Wait for me." Seeing Ethan's anxious look, I felt depressed. Whenever Sandy called him, Ethan would drop everything and run to her without hesitation. I tried to persuade him because we were only several miles away from his hometown. "Ethan, we're almost home. You should go home and meet your mother first." Ethan parked the car on the side of the road and glanced at me with disdain in his eyes. "Yolanda, what's wrong with you? Didn't you hear Sandy say she was sick? You go home and celebrate my mother's birthday. We are not far from home, and you can walk home. Sandy can't take care of herself. I need to hurry over now." I looked at Ethan in shock and disappointment. "Ethan, I've been pregnant for 8 months. The doctor said that I'm at risk of premature birth at any time." Ethan glanced at my belly with disdain and snorted coldly. "Yolanda, you know how you got pregnant. I married you only out of responsibility. Don't try to threaten me with this. It will only make me sick." Ethan's words were like a knife stabbing into my heart, making me unable to breathe. I had always known that Ethan married me just for the baby in my belly. In his eyes, I was just a woman who would do anything to marry him. But that night, it was he who took the initiative, but in the end, he said I did that shamelessly to marry him. In the end, Ethan kicked me out of the car. Before he left, I heard him calling Sandy and comforting her softly. "Sandy, I'll be there soon. Wait for me." My fetus had always been unstable. The doctor said that I should rest in bed as much as possible. Ethan was a very filial man, and his mother Jenny liked me very much, so today he asked me for the first time to go to his hometown with him to celebrate Jenny's birthday. I walked alone on the country road and felt my stomach gradually tightening. The strong feeling of pressure made me feel uncomfortable. I had to take a rest from time to time. The sky gradually darkened and began to rain. Suddenly, a dazzling light shone in front of me, and I could hardly open my eyes. I saw an SUV speeding towards me. I tried to dodge it, but I was hit by the car and flew away. The moment I fell, I felt my internal organs shattered and great pain over my body. I subconsciously reached for my belly, and there was the blood mixed with the rain. My phone fell out of my bag. I looked at the dimly lit screen and pressed the shortcut key with trembling hands, calling the emergency contact. The phone rang for a long time before Ethan answered it. "Sandy has a high fever now, and I'm about to take her to the hospital. Can you stop being unreasonable? Stop bothering me." After saying that, Ethan hung up the phone without hesitation. As I listened to the busy tone coming from the other end of the phone, I fell into despair. The SUV stopped to the side, and after a long time, the person in the car got out. In the last moment before my consciousness faded, I heard a trembling voice calling on the phone. "I hit someone, and I don't know if she's dead or not. What should I do? Are you sure that if I kill her, I will bear less responsibility?" Then he started the car and ran over my body again. 2. When I opened my eyes again, I had turned into a soul floating in the air. Before I could take a last look at my bloody corpse, a gust of wind blew me to Ethan's side. Ethan and Sandy were sitting on a bench in the emergency waiting area. Sandy looked weak and leaned on Ethan's shoulder, her face full of sweetness and happiness. At this time, Ethan's phone rang. It was his mother Jenny. "Yolanda, didn't he come home to celebrate your birthday? I think she is mad at me on purpose. I am accompanying Sandy to the hospital. Yolanda is so mean." After hanging up the phone, Ethan still seemed a little angry with a gloomy face. "Yolanda takes herself too seriously. She thinks she can do whatever she wants now that she is pregnant. I won't look for her this time. It's time for her to learn her lesson." There was pride and joy in Sandy's eyes, but she still looked considerate and patted Ethan on the back. "Ethan, don't be angry. It's my fault. I shouldn't have asked you to accompany me." Seeing Sandy blaming herself, Ethan hugged her and comforted her. "Yolanda is not worthy of being compared to you." As I looked at the cold look in Ethan's eyes when he mentioned me, my heart was completely broken. I met Ethan for the first time when I went to visit my brother Chris Jackson at his school. At first sight, I was attracted to Ethan and started to pursue him. At that time, Sandy had just gone abroad. Ethan was sad and was in a daze all day long. I followed him all the time. In the beginning, he ignored me, but later he started to accept me. I thought I had won his heart, but I didn't expect that things would be completely changed that night. I received Ethan's invitation to go to the hotel, and as soon as I entered the room, he hugged me. After that night, his eyes turned cold and disgusted when he looked at me. Despite my repeated explanations, he still felt that it was a setup by me. Later, I became pregnant and he married me under pressure from Jenny. I always thought that I would move him one day and the truth would come out one day. But now, I could no longer wait for that day. After Ethan sent Sandy home, he drove back to our home. He was a little absent-minded along the way, and he looked at his mobile phone from time to time. When he got home and found the house was black, he couldn't help but frown. She has a bad temper. She even dares not go home. In the past, no matter how angry I was, I would never stay out all night. Ethan glanced at his phone, but there was still no message. He felt annoyed and took off his tie. Suddenly, his cell phone rang, and the sound was particularly sharp in the quiet night. Ethan hurriedly picked up his phone. When he saw the name Sandy, I saw a trace of disappointment on his face for the first time, but it disappeared soon. Ethan, please help me with the case of my brother that I told you about tonight. I've already asked him to turn himself into the police station. Ethan rubbed his brows, looking a little tired. Don't worry, Sandy. Your brother is my brother. I will help him minimize the responsibility. 3. The next day, Ethan woke up on the sofa. Last night, he was sitting alone in the living room, lost in thought. He looked at the clock from time to time and finally fell asleep on the sofa. When Ethan stood up and saw the untouched slippers at the door, his face was gloomy. Then he took out his phone and sent me a message for the first time. Yolanda, since you don't want to come back, then you might as well never come back. I looked at Ethan and sneered, thinking, I will never come back to bother you again. Ethan washed up and went to the law firm. This was the law firm he and my brother Chris founded together. Not long after Ethan sat down, Sandy walked in with a stack of documents, looking a little nervous. Ethan, you are the only one who can help me this time. With tears in her eyes, Sandy looked pitiful. I asked Alex and he said he didn't do it on purpose. The road was slippery due to the rain and his vision was a little blurry, so he hit someone. Ethan immediately helped her sit down and took the documents from her. Is the person dead? Sandy nodded. Ethan's face looked a little bad and he continued to ask, have you contacted the person's family? Do you have any information about the person? Sandy shook her head. Alex said that the person was hit and flew and just hit the windshield. Her facial features were all ruined. No information could confirm her identity. We have not been able to contact her family yet. Ethan's eyes became more solemn. How fast was Alex driving at the time? Were there any surveillance cameras or witnesses around? He said the speed was no more than 80 miles per hour. It was a country road and there was no surveillance. It was raining at the time and there were no one around. Sandy lowered her head, looking scared and worried. Pondering for a while, Ethan asked, are you sure Alex didn't flee or exceed the speed limit? Sandy raised her eyes and looked at Ethan with tears. Ethan, are you doubting what I said? Alex called the hospital right away. The hospital has a record of the call. After confirming that the person was dead, he went to the police station to turn himself in. He is still in the police station now. Seeing Sandy crying, Ethan immediately panicked. Sandy, that's not what I meant. I just want to know more so that I can defend him and try to minimize the responsibility. Sandy threw herself into Ethan's arms and burst into tears. Ethan, you are the only person I can trust now. You must help me and Alex. Hearing Sandy cried, Ethan felt sorry for her. He hugged Sandy tightly and promised her solemnly, Sandy, don't worry. I will find a way to save Alex. After Sandy calmed down, she raised her head and looked at Ethan. There's one more thing I forgot to tell you. The person was a pregnant woman. Sandy's words stunned Ethan. As if thinking of something, he looked at Sandy nervously and asked, where is the location? Sandy said, it seems to be on a country road in Barone City. Hearing these words, I was certain that the victim in Alex's case was me. Ethan was stunned as if something had exploded in his head. At this moment, the office door was suddenly pushed open and Chris rushed in. Ethan, where's Yolanda? She hasn't replied to my messages for a whole day. In the wailing night she ran away. When I was killed by gangsters, he disappeared. Your lips are 4. The last message I sent to Chris was that I would let him try the new soup I learned today. Ethan was stunned for a moment, a little dazed. Then he took out his cell phone and called me. Seeing that no one answered, he was nervous, and even his forehead was covered with beads of sweat. When Ethan's nerves were about to break, the call was hung up. Ethan relaxed instantly and then became furious. See, she hung up on me. Don't you know what kind of temper Yolanda has? Yesterday was my mother's birthday, and I asked her to celebrate her birthday, but she ran away halfway and even pretended to be missing. She wants me to comfort her, right? I felt disappointed when I saw Ethan put the blame on me without hesitation. Chris clenched his fists as if he wanted to punch Ethan, but after a while, he gave up. Ethan, Yolanda is pregnant. How could you let her go to see your mother alone? Yolanda is your wife now. She loves you so much. Can't you see that? Chris glanced meaningfully at Sandy, who was sitting on the sofa, his eyes full of disdain. Ethan took a step forward and stood in front of Sandy. Chris, you know why I married Yolanda. Apart from responsibility, I don't have any other feelings for her. Chris looked at Ethan angrily. Yolanda said she didn't do that, and I believe her. Don't go too far, or I will drive you out of our city. Seeing Chris tried so hard to protect me, I regretted it. I regretted that I made myself so miserable and even lose my life for someone who didn't love me. Ethan ignored Chris' warning and snorted coldly. You two are really alike. You both like to use threats to get what you want. Ethan, you'd better pray that Yolanda can come back safely. Otherwise, I will never let you off. Chris stopped arguing with Ethan. He opened the door and prepared to leave. Before leaving, he suddenly took a step back and looked at Sandy, who was sitting on the sofa. He said in a deep voice, Sandy, if anything happens to Yolanda, I can't guarantee that I can keep the things you did a secret. Sandy was frightened, and even her hands that were holding Ethan's sleeves were shaking. Ethan, I don't know when I offended Chris. Why does he say this to me? I didn't do anything. Sandy looked at Ethan with tears in her eyes. Ethan hugged her and looked in the direction where Chris left. Ethan snorted coldly. They are the same. They will do anything to achieve their goals. Don't be afraid. I will protect you. I looked at Chris back and fell into deep thought. I didn't quite understand what he said. What other secrets did Sandy have? Because my parents died early, I had lived with Chris since I was young, and he protected me so well that I knew nothing about the dangers of the outside world. You might also like runaway marriage. When I can't say goodbye to you personally. On the wedding vigu she rim ase. Runaway marriage. On the wedding night, she say goodbye to my beloved husband ran away. 5. At night, Ethan went back home, feeling tired. Seeing there was still no one in the house, he showed an ugly face. He took out his phone and opened my chat interface, and the last message was the one he sent me in the morning. Ethan felt irritated, as if something was strangling his neck and making it difficult for him to breathe. He pulled his tie open and felt the air, allowing him to breathe briefly. Ethan opened his phone and sent me another message. Yolanda, you should stop messing around. Do you know that Chris blamed me today? Are you very proud that someone can support you? I'll tell you one last time. If you don't come back, then never come back. I sat next to Ethan, watching him staring at his phone, and I found it funny. In the past, I was afraid that Chris and Ethan would have a conflict because of me, so I always tried to be a peacemaker between them and take all the blame on myself. However, Ethan belittled and insulted me again and again. Now that I was gone, he couldn't stand it. This was just the beginning. If Chris knew that I was dead, he would take revenge on Ethan. Not receiving a reply for a long time, Ethan threw his phone aside and lay on the sofa. After a while, he frowned and his face turned pale and ugly. Ethan held his stomach tightly with one hand and waved his other hand in the air. Yolanda, I have a stomachache. Bring me the medicine. After he finished speaking, he suddenly opened his eyes. The room was still dark and quiet. Ethan stood up dejectedly and went to look for the medicine box, but he couldn't find it anywhere after searching the living room. In the past, I would help him with all these things. As long as he frowned, I could tell he was feeling unwell. Worried about his stomach problems, I, a person who had never done housework, started cooking for him. Ethan came to the master bedroom and found his stomach medicine. In the bedside table, there were several kinds of stomach medicine in it. Ethan took them out, but he didn't know how to take them. After opening the instruction manual, he suddenly picked up all the medicines and threw them out fiercely. In an instant, he seemed to have found an outlet for his anger and threw the wedding photo on the bedside table out. The photo frame shattered into pieces and glass splashed everywhere. Ethan still felt unsatisfied, so he picked up his phone and dialed my number. The call couldn't be connected. Ethan sent me another message angrily. Yolanda, I'll give you one last chance. If you don't come back, we'll get a divorce. 6. Ethan slept with his phone in his hand the entire night. The first thing he did when he woke up was to check his phone. Seeing there was a new message, he jumped out of bed. Seeing the message from Sandy, he showed disappointment in his eyes. Sandy said Alex was in the police station and she was very worried, wanting to ask if he could apply for bail. Hearing Sandy's gentle voice, Ethan immediately got up to wash up. He comforted her, "Don't worry, Sandy. I will go to the police station today as Alex's defense lawyer to apply for bail." Receiving Ethan's affirmative answer, Sandy felt relieved. "I followed Ethan and watched him busy with Alex's case, and suddenly I became curious. If Ethan knew that I was the victim in this case, would he feel a little sad?" Ethan went to Sandy's home to pick her up, and then they drove to the police station together. "When I first saw the person who killed me in the police station, I was scared. Even though I knew I was dead, I still couldn't help but hide behind Ethan to seek a little protection." Alex sat on the stool with a swagger. With the handcuffs on his hands, he still showed arrogance on his face. With a frown, Ethan put the information down and began to record. "I'm your defense lawyer, Ethan Wilson. I'd like to know about the case." Alex leaned on the stool, shaking his legs. "Are you Sandy's previous lover? You will help me, right?" Ethan was unhappy with what Alex said, but he didn't show it. The meeting time was limited and he had to get to the point. "That day, did you drink, speed, or run a red light while driving?" Alex's face was full of impatience. "Haven't I told you all this before? I didn't drink, speed, or run a red light. Why are you asking this again?" Ethan showed disdain on his handsome face. "These are very important to the case and are directly related to your criminal liability verdict. Don't you like Sandy? As long as you help me solve this case, I can guarantee that what you will get her." Alex crossed his legs and looked at Ethan with a sly smile. "I'm not kidding you. If you want to avoid criminal responsibility, please tell me everything about the case. Otherwise, no one can help you." Ethan finally couldn't bear it anymore and slammed the table. Alex was so scared that his legs trembled. Alex seemed to be frightened by Ethan's words. He said, "The speed was about 80 miles that day. I don't remember exactly. It was raining and my vision was blurry. My phone fell and I went to pick it up, so I hit someone. If it was only 80 miles, it wouldn't have caused the person to be disfigured." "You are not telling the truth." Ethan looked at Alex with cold eyes, trying to find a flaw on his face. Although Alex was a little afraid of Ethan, he still insisted that the speed was 80 miles. "She wasn't careful when she walked. She was pregnant but still walked out at night. She should blame her bad luck. I am also a victim." After Alex roughly understood the situation, he stood up and prepared to leave. As soon as he turned around, he seemed to have thought of something. He asked Alex, "Which road did the accident happen?" Alex looked at him blankly, not understanding why he asked about this. "A rural road in front of Lyasa village in Barone City." When Ethan heard Alex's words, his body swayed and he almost fell. He stretched out his hands and held the back of the stool tightly to prevent himself from falling. "Runaway marriage. On the wedding night, she ran away. Your lips are like peach gummies. I want to kiss them. Am dead but my love." 7. Ethan calmed himself down and muttered to himself, "It couldn't be her. How could it be her? She hung up on me yesterday. It definitely couldn't be her." I sneered at Ethan's appearance and shouted in his ear, "Ethan, stop deceiving yourself. I'm the one who died. Don't you hate me? Why are you so afraid of discovering the truth now?" After Ethan comforted himself, he straightened his back and walked out. As soon as he went out, Sandy came to him. "Ethan, how is it?" Ethan shook his head. "Because he killed someone and the family of the person can't be contacted yet, the police rejected the request for bail. We need to contact the family of the person first." Sandy held Ethan's hand, her eyes full of urgency. "Are you confident about this case?" Ethan nodded. "As long as Alex is telling the truth, and he didn't speed or hit and run, it is just a traffic accident. The maximum sentence is 3 years in prison." Sandy's heart, which had just been relieved, became nervous again after hearing what Ethan said. She held his hand tightly. "No, Alex can't go to jail. He is still so young. He can't have a criminal record. Ethan, aren't you the best lawyer in our city? Can you help him?" As Sandy spoke, she began to cry, and her voice was trembling. Ethan couldn't bear to see Sandy's tears, so he softened his heart. "I'm talking about the worst result. As long as we can prove that what Alex said is true or gain the forgiveness of that person's family, we can regretful L. 8. At this time, Ethan's cell phone rang. He picked up the phone and saw that it was Chris. "Ethan, where is Yolanda? When he heard my name, Ethan's face darkened. I'm not Yolanda's agent. How would I know where she went? Ethan's tone was a bit aggressive, and Chris on the other end of the phone was also angry. Ethan, Yolanda hasn't contacted me for 2 days. If anything happens to her, I will never forgive you. Yolanda is an adult. I can't just tie her around, right? She just disappeared on purpose because she saw me going to look for Sandy. She wanted me to comfort her, right? I tell you, it's impossible. Chris, if Yolanda contacts you, please tell her that if she doesn't want to be with me, we can get a divorce. Tell her stop making trouble all day long. Ethan's voice was so loud that it attracted the attention of people around him. Seeing Ethan's reaction, Sandy showed joy on her face. Ethan, you bastard. Do you think Yolanda must be with you? When she comes back, I will let her divorce you. Chris almost roared as he hung up the phone. After Ethan put away his phone, he asked the police to allow him to see the vehicle involved in the accident. Sandy went with him. On the way to the parking lot, Sandy's face looked very ugly. The vehicle was a large black SUV with a large piece of its windshield shattered and bloodstains on the front of the car, which showed how severe the impact was. Ethan walked around the vehicle and squatted beside the rear wheel. Seeing the bloodstains on the wheel hub, he frowned and looked at Sandy. Are you sure Alex didn't lie? Sandy turned her head away, feeling somewhat guilty. I'm sure. Hearing what Sandy said, Ethan didn't ask any more questions. When he was about to stand up, he was blinded by a reflected light. Ethan reached out and touched the tire, only to see a ring stuck in the gap below the tire. Ethan was distracted for a moment when he saw the ring. Even his hand that was stretched out was trembling. The ring had been deformed and was stuck in the gap, so it couldn't be taken out. Ethan, what's wrong? Did you find anything? Seeing Ethan in a daze, Sandy gently pushed him. The officer asks us to go out. Ethan covered the ring, then stood up and left with Sandy. After leaving the police station, Ethan looked at Sandy solemnly. Sandy, you should tell me the truth. Sandy was stunned, then she understood what Ethan meant and burst into tears. Ethan, I didn't mean it. I was just too scared. You know I only have one brother. If anything happens to him, how am I going to explain to my family? Alex was indeed speeding, but that was because there was Northwest 1 on the road at the time. You know that young people like to pursue excitement. He didn't expect that a pregnant woman would appear on the road. Sandy cried sadly, and Ethan's face became increasingly gloomy. He didn't just speed. He killed someone. Sandy's crying stopped abruptly the moment Ethan finished speaking. After a few seconds, Sandy shook her head frantically to deny it. That's impossible. Alex would never kill anyone. Ethan let out a long sigh. If he just hit someone and called an ambulance immediately, there shouldn't be any of the victim's belongings or blood on his rear wheel. I think Alex hit that woman first, then reversed and ran over her again, causing her to die on the spot. As I listened to Ethan's analysis, my head started to ache. I grabbed my hair, trying to suppress the pain, but it was no use. Suddenly, I seemed to be back to the day when the incident happened. I was knocked to the ground and watched Alex get out of the car. He looked very excited and called someone. The person on the other end of the phone told him that if I died, the responsibility would be less. Otherwise, it would be more troublesome if I was disabled. So Alex got in the car again and ran over my body. The pain was so intense that I could still feel it whenever I thought about it. I remembered it. The call Alex made that day was to Sandy. It was Sandy who asked Alex to hit me to death. Seeing that she could no longer hide the truth, Sandy pretended to be innocent again. Ethan, I don't know if what you said is true, but I believe Alex is not that kind of person. He told me that he didn't do that, and I believe him. Ethan looked at Sandy and sighed helplessly, then he touched her hair. You're too innocent. Seeing that Ethan believed her, Sandy pulled his hand with tears in her eyes. Ethan, I only have one brother. Please save him, okay? Looking at Sandy's pitiful appearance, Ethan finally softened his heart. If I don't want to save him, I would have notified the police when I found the evidence. Don't worry, your brother is my brother. I will do my best to help him win this lawsuit. Sandy was completely relieved when she heard Ethan's words, and then she threw herself into Ethan's arms. Ethan, I knew you wouldn't leave me alone. You still care about me, right? Ethan's arm around Sandy was a little stiff, but he patted her shoulder without answering. Seeing this scene, my love for Ethan completely collapsed in just a moment. I had always admired Ethan because of his seriousness in his work. In my eyes, he had always been a good lawyer who helped people who needed legal assistance. Now, his oaths seemed as funny as my love for him. For the sake of Sandy, he was actually willing to give false testimony to the criminal who killed me. The judicial appraisal would take 2 days, so Ethan went back to prepare the litigation materials. It was very late when Ethan got off work. As soon as he opened the office door, he saw Chris sitting alone on the sofa in the reception area, staring at him. Ethan was startled and rubbed his eyebrows. "Chris, what's wrong with you? Why are you sitting here without turning on the lights at night?" Chris didn't move, but his expression became more gloomy. "I heard that you took over Alex's case." Ethan was stunned for a moment but didn't hide it. "It is just an ordinary accident." "Ordinary?" Chris stood up from the sofa and smiled sarcastically. "He killed someone and you call it ordinary?" Facing Chris' questioning, Ethan felt a little annoyed. He was not drunk driving or speeding, and he didn't run a red light. How could this not be an ordinary accident? He hit and killed a woman who was pregnant for 8 months. You tell me this is an ordinary case? Have you already prepared to commit perjury in this case? I was stunned when I heard Chris' words. Ethan asked, "How do you know the details of the case?" Chris' eyes were full of anger, but he didn't say anything more to Ethan and prepared to leave. Seeing Chris was about to leave, Ethan hurriedly stopped him. "Did Yolanda contact you? Tell her that if she continues to act like this, I won't let her back again." Chris looked at Ethan coldly, then pushed him away. "That's exactly what I want. I hope you won't regret it." Ethan was stunned by Chris' attitude. I looked at Chris back as he walked away, and I felt that he was acting abnormal today, as if he already knew that I was dead. 10. Ethan contacted the police and wanted to communicate with the family of the deceased, but her family refused and demanded a thorough investigation. They had only one request, which was the death penalty. This result was something Ethan hadn't expected. "Ethan, please save Alex. No matter how much compensation they ask for, I can find a way." After Sandy learned the result, she cried and found Ethan. Ethan was also having a headache. He was completely unable to contact the woman's family, which was a very rare situation. There were only a few days left before the trial. If he couldn't contact the woman's family, it would be very unfavorable to Alex's situation. Ethan began to inquire around and found out that the other party had also hired a lawyer. When Ethan saw the name of the lawyer, he was stunned. It was Chris. Ethan instantly became angry and rushed to Chris' office. He kicked the office door open and found Chris standing quietly in front of the window. Chris' back looked tired and weak, not as energetic as before. "Chris, what do you mean? You knew that I took Alex's case and you deliberately wanted to go against me, didn't you?" Chris turned around and looked at Ethan with cold eyes. "Ethan, where's Yolanda?" Ethan didn't expect Chris to ask this and was stunned for a while. "Didn't Yolanda contact you?" Chris suddenly started laughing and then crying. "I feel sorry for Yolanda. She's been gone for so many days, but you're only thinking about how to help Sandy, that scheming woman." Ethan was a little confused. "What do you mean? Where did Yolanda go?" Chris snorted coldly. "Have you ever cared about her and the baby in her belly? You know how Yolanda got the baby. Why do you insist on forcing me to be with her?" Ethan kicked the coffee table in annoyance, and the coffee table made a harsh noise. Chris took out a stack of documents from the drawer and threw it at Ethan. "Take a good look yourself and see how Yolanda got pregnant." Ethan picked up the documents on the ground, and his eyes changed after seeing what was on them. He became confused, scared, and even regretful. The hotel's surveillance was destroyed and the waiter disappeared. I spent a lot of effort to collect all the evidence. The documents showed why Ethan and I went to the hotel. At that time, Ethan went to meet a client who was a relative of a previous case. Because he held a grudge against Ethan, he deliberately drugged his water, intending to ruin his reputation. At the same time, Ethan asked me to meet him at the hotel and then have dinner together. By accident, I walked into that room. From then on, the relationship between Ethan and me broke down, and he was convinced that I had drugged him. That's impossible. After reading all the documents, Ethan could no longer stand stable and leaned against the table. 11. Ethan returned home in a daze. Facing the empty house, he cried for the first time. He sat on the bed in the bedroom, holding the doll I placed on the bedside and stroking it gently. Then he took out his cell phone and sent me a message. "Yolanda, I misunderstood you. Please go home. I want to apologize to you in person." There was still no response. The next day was the trial. Ethan and Sandy arrived there early. Chris arrived late, carrying a briefcase. Although he was only in his 30s, he looked much older. Chris glanced at Sandy standing next to Ethan with anger in his eyes. "Sandy, you will pay for everything you have done." Sandy was startled by Chris' expression and shrank back behind Ethan. Ethan protected Sandy behind him. "Chris, Yolanda's matter is my fault. I will apologize to her in person." when she returns, but this matter has nothing to do with Sandy. Please don't take your anger out on her. Nothing to do with her. Chris sneered and then whispered in Ethan's ear, I have sent a gift to your phone. I hope you can still say that after reading it. After saying that, Chris went to court. Ethan was about to turn on his phone, but the court session had already started, so he had to go in first. When the trial began, Alex was escorted out with handcuffs on his hands. Sandy sat on the jury. The judge looked at Chris and asked, have the victim's family members arrived? Chris looked up at Ethan and smiled sarcastically. The victim's family is standing in the victim's defense seat. Hearing Chris' words, the audience was shocked. Ethan, who stood in the defense seat, was in a daze with disbelief in his eyes. Ethan, don't you want the victim's family to sign a reconciliation agreement? As Yolanda's husband, you should sign it. Ethan's spirit was crushed by Chris' pressing gaze. He collapsed and slumped on the seat. He opened his mouth but couldn't he make a sound. Chris said loudly, Alex ran over the victim again knowing that she was still alive. He is suspected of intentional homicide. We implore the judge to sentence him to death. After hearing this, Alex immediately became furious. You're talking nonsense. I didn't do that. She bumped into my car on her own. Sandy kept winking at Alex and the jury, but Alex lost his mind with bloodshot eyes. Chris looked towards the jury and a teenage boy came out. I have a witness, Chris said. The boy was holding my broken phone and his phone. He timidly handed over his phone. I took a video of that day. Alex panicked and looked at Sandy in the jury. Sandy, save me. Didn't you say that if I killed her, my responsibility would be much less? Isn't it just a matter of paying some money? Didn't you say that Ethan loved you and he would help you? Alex's words made Ethan fall into despair. The sentencing was postponed because there was a new witness and evidence. Ethan walked out of the court in a daze and Sandy caught up with him. Ethan, Alex was just talking nonsense. Don't believe him. Ethan turned around and looked at Sandy, his eyes filled with indifference and malice that she had never seen before. Sandy took a step forward and tried to hold Ethan's hand, but Ethan waved his hand away and yelled, "Go away." Sandy fell to the ground. No matter how loudly she cried, Ethan didn't turn back. Sandy was arrested. Ethan came to the morgue to claim my body. My unrecognizable body lay there quietly, looking somewhat disgusting and scary. Ethan tried to hold my hand but was pushed away by Chris, who came from behind. "What right do you have to touch my sister?" Ethan knelt on the ground, crying heartbreakingly. "I was wrong. I shouldn't have left her alone. I shouldn't have believed Sandy's words. It's all my fault. I killed Yolanda." Chris snorted coldly. "If it weren't for you, Yolanda wouldn't have died. You are the murderer and you should pay for your life." In the end, Chris took my body away and Ethan came to the police station, wanting to check the vehicle that caused the accident again. Then he took the ring out from under the wheel. That was my wedding ring. It was a plain silver ring. When we went shopping together, I begged him to buy it for me. "Ethan, can we consider this as our wedding ring?" Ethan's eyes were filled with disdain, but he still bought it. That day was the happiest since I married him. Ethan carefully held the ring in his palm. On the day of my burial, Chris stopped Ethan from entering the cemetery. Ethan stood outside the cemetery for a long time. It was raining lightly, just like the day I died. When Chris came out, Ethan was still there. "You didn't cherish Yolanda when she was alive and killed her and the baby. Why do you come here to pretend to be affectionate now?" Ethan didn't say anything but just stood there, letting the rain hit his body. After Chris left, Ethan staggered in. When he saw my name on the tombstone, he could no longer control the guilt and regret in his heart. And he threw himself in front of the tombstone and burst into tears. It was late at night when Ethan returned home. He took out his cell phone and flipped through the messages I had sent him. Suddenly, he thought of what Chris had said to him in court, and he opened the file on his phone. It was all about Sandy. Back then, Sandy left Ethan because she fell in love with Chris, but she was rejected by him. She was afraid that the truth would be exposed, so she hooked up with another rich man and went abroad. After being abandoned by the rich man, she returned and went to Ethan again. Ethan had me at his side at that time, so Sandy teamed up with Ethan's client to plan the incident at the hotel. Originally, she was planning to sleep with Ethan, but she didn't expect me to go there by accident. Ethan completely collapsed when he knew the truth. 13. In the end, Alex was sentenced to death and Sandy was sentenced to 7 years in prison for planning murder. On the day the verdict came out, Ethan was sitting alone on the road where I was hit and killed. "Yolanda, the bad guys got the punishment they deserved. Are you happy?" I shook my head because I wasn't happy. Yolanda, do you know, I have fallen in love with you since you followed me every day. You were like my sun, always shining on me. It was me who did not cherish you, which hurt you and our child. Ethan sat under the tree and drank wine. At this moment, a light flashed across the sky as if guiding me there. When I was about to leave, Ethan suddenly grabbed my hand. Yolanda, is that you? You came to see me, right? You still love me, right? I didn't know if Ethan drank too much, but he could see me all of a sudden. I was a little stunned, then I shook off his hand and sneered at him. I have always been by your side, watching how you helped Sandy escape the blame and cover up the truth. Hearing my words, Ethan let go of my hand and stood there at a loss. Yolanda, Ethan panicked and wanted to explain, but didn't know what to say. I'm leaving now. I hope I never meet you again in my next life. Ethan tried to grab me in a hurry but missed. Yolanda, don't go. Don't leave me alone. I love you. I looked at Ethan coldly. But I don't love you anymore. A person was standing at the entrance in the light, waving at me. Mom, my child came to pick me up. I didn't know whether Ethan was ashamed or afraid. He watched me walk away step by step, but he didn't dare to look at our child. Finally, my child took my hand and pulled me forward. Mom, I will protect you from now on. When I looked back, I saw a truck coming and Ethan crashed into it without hesitation. He was hit by the truck and fell to the ground. I didn't know if he died. Later, I heard that Ethan, the successful lawyer in our city, was paralyzed in bed due to a car accident and would never be able to get up again. The end.